This is from Doolittle Vol. Just give us some of your most entertaining, funniest recruiting stories. I could honestly listen to Hubs talk old recruiting stories for hours.
This one, I'm going to give Hubs the floor, but I'm going to give him some areas that I want him to venture into. I believe there was a school administrator that you bugged like crazy trying to get kids on the phone, or an office worker, a kid on the phone. And then there was another one where the kid didn't have a house phone, but he called the neighbor to get the neighbor to go talk to the kid, or get the kid on the phone. So from those two things, go.
Jarius Jackson, who was from Mississippi, who ended up going to Notre Dame, was a quarterback who did not have a working house phone. And so the number I had for him was the neighbor, who was the sweetest, kindest person that you would ever get a hold of. Out of respect, you didn't call her after dark, because literally when you called them and said, I'm trying to reach Jarius, you could hear the sliding door open, and she walked her cordless phone out to the backyard
Called him over to the fence.
Jarius, and Jarius would come over and would be on the phone that way. Sweetest lady. I have no idea what her name was. I can't remember now, but she was the sweetest lady. Jarius Jackson. I think it was from Tupelo, but somewhere in Mississippi. Maybe not been Tupelo. There have been multiple school administrators that on signing day you wore out. There was a school administrator, and I can't remember who the prospect was, but there was a school administrator that I got her to transfer the call to the auditorium, and somebody just held the phone up. Now, it sort of sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher, but you can make out Tennessee. And so I confirmed, there's no text messaging back then. Nobody's got a cell phone. So I confirmed that person had committed to Tennessee. It was a signing day commit, because some lady was kind enough to hold the phone up in the auditorium so you could hear.
She had no idea she was a Volquest freelancer at that point. At that moment in time.
That might have been talk radio. That might have been 90s talk radio with Mike Keith. At that point in time, she had no idea what she was doing. Yeah, I was a much kinder person back then, Grant. I could really. Yeah,
you're so edgy now.
I could really talk and convince people to do some things for me that way. The most nervous I ever was probably on a commitment. T. Martin had changed his mind about 4 times during the process. Committed to Tennessee, Auburn, Tennessee, and the whole 9 yards, right? And so it was the time of his announcement, and he was announcing at like 3:15, 3:30ish, somewhere in there, right after school was let out. Maybe it was 3:25 at the gym. They wouldn't let him do it during school, because I think it might have been his second press conference, because he had changed his mind. I can't remember.
I'll give you 1, not 2.
Yeah. And so he was doing something in the gym or the auditorium. And the coach, I called the coach's office number, and T was in there. And I got T on the phone, and I interviewed T at like 3. Sports Talk came on at 3:15. And so I interviewed him and recorded an interview with him saying he was committed to Tennessee. And we basically ran the interview as the press conference started and unfolded. And I paced the radio station floor he was very emphatic it was Tennessee, right? But I was like, man, if this guy gets up there and pulls out an Auburn hat, might lose my job at this point. Yeah. But we could go on at 3:15. Tennessee's newest football commitment is 4-star quarterback T. Martin. Tennessee holds off a late challenge from Auburn. Here's T. Martin talking about, this, that, or the other. And then you just hoped he didn't change his mind for the 8th time. So that one was very, very nerve-wracking.
It was very. It was 2 trains leaving the station at the same time.
Yeah, and you just didn't know which. Were you on the? Did you pick the right train or not pick the right train? That one was hard. I've never had anybody interview me more than Kevin Simon did. Kevin Simon loved an 11:45 midnight Eastern phone call where he was just quizzing you about everything in Knoxville and the program. And all you're trying to figure out is like, hey, man, you definitely going to visit? When you're going to visit? Where's it at? That type of thing. I I talked to him probably more than anybody at that point early on in the Volquest tenure, because he was he was just, I mean, he was a very inquisitive human being, and he was looking for specific things, and he asked a lot of questions. Chris Donald was the first one I ever got to do like a pre-written story. I convinced him when he was in San Antonio to do an interview with me, and I would hold it until he put his hat on NBC at the Army All-American game. And as soon as he put his hat on, I turned the story loose that had quotes. So that was my first foray into having something pre-written. I don't think I'd ever done it before then. Super nice guy, Chris Don. Didn't work out, but super nice kid. Really good kid.
Austin was here. He would tell us about getting out the phone book and calling every Stevens family in Flower Mound, Texas.
Yeah, we've heard that story.
Until he got a hold of it.
If Austin was here, he would tell the story about Eric Berry, which is a good story.
That's true.
He would tell the Eric Berry
good
story.
ones.
Tell us about you calling Randy Moss a lot, because I hadn't heard that one in a couple of years.
I tell you what, I'm doing a story. I hope to get it done by Wednesday on the 92 Tennessee-Georgia football game. And I'm doing that story because basically this fall will be almost to the day, the 33rd anniversary of that game. And I've always been fascinated by that game. And I was doing an interview with Philip. And Grant, if you listen to the audio, you probably heard the back end of that conversation because you put it through the transcriber for me. For whatever reason, at the end of the conversation, he and I got on the topic of Randy Moss. And I told him the Randy Moss story about Randy's schedule of, Randy went and ate lunch and then went home and took a nap. And I just called Randy until he finally answered the phone, dog cussed me, told me he was going to Notre Dame, and hung up. And that was the only conversation I've ever had with Randy Moss. And I wish him nothing but great health, because I love him on TV now. I think he's
coming back to TV. He's coming back.
Don't you think he's great on TV?
Oh yeah, he's really good.
I love him. And it's one of those deals where I always wanted to. I mean, literally, for years I could recite the kid's home phone number. Like, he was at Marshall, and I could still recite the kid's home phone number. And he was a pain. God, he was a pain. But man, he was so good. And now he's fun on TV. I called Bob Pruitt. Was it Bob Pruitt? Was he the coach at Marshall when Randy Moss was there? I think it was.
You're asking me. I think I saw Randy play in the mini dome.
Did you?
During the Marshall years, if I'm not mistaken.
So I think Bob Pruitt, yes.
Bob Pruitt was the head coach. Randy had been dismissed at Florida State because he couldn't leave the state of West Virginia because he had violated his parole deal. And so everybody knew he wasn't going to go to West Virginia because that recruitment was just a disaster. And I literally called, and I have no idea. I guess there were some rumors that maybe he was going to try to come to Tennessee, which, I mean, he couldn't even legally do, I don't think. And I called the Marshall football office, and like an assistant coach answered the phone, and I just asked for Coach Pruitt. And Bob Pruitt got on the phone and said, "Hey, is Randy Moss coming to play for you?"
Oh,
and he was like, "Who are you, and why are you calling me?"
Don't worry who I am. Don't worry who I am.
Don't worry about who I am. But is he coming or not? And he kind of stammered around and basically no commented me. And at that point, I knew he was going to Marshall. When you deal with those coaches at that level, it's pretty fun. I called Dave Clawson, just cold called him in his office and asked him if he was a candidate to be the offense coordinator at Tennessee. And he was just dumbfounded. Like, his secretary just put me right through to him. He's like, "Hello, Coach Clawson." I'm like, "Hey, man, you coming to Tennessee?" He's like, "Who are you, and why are you cold calling me?"
Speaking of Dave Clawson, that's another deep dive. That JV game in 2000, what was that, 8? That was a surreal experience.
Oh, the Hargrave game?
Yes.
Yeah, that was to get, I guess, Hefty and some of those guys, because Hargrave had so many of those players. There was a defensive lineman on that team that Tennessee was trying to get to. I don't remember if they got him, but they wanted them to play that game in Neyland Stadium because there was, quote, a recruiting advantage for them.
Right. I was
Did
a
you
student.
cover that game?
I was a student. I was in the press box, and I remember
I was up there going, "Why are we here?"
Yeah, and Philip was sitting like in a box by himself, lights turned out, just watching the game. It felt like, I think. And then we were on the field after the game, and we tried to get Clawson to talk, and I think he knew his fate already at that point. He's like, I'm not talking after this.
Yeah, I'm out of here.
What I want to know is how do those JV games work? Because there was one year.
Well, they
They
don't
did.
work anymore, right? They don't exist. That's why it's so crazy.
They don't
It was
anymore. I know
bad.
that, but
It was bad.
Even
didn't Tennessee have a BJ Coleman getting him ready to start a game at quarterback and put him out there in a
Right.
JV game one time or
Right.
something like that?
Oh yeah.
Even in 2008, it felt like this hadn't been done in 30 years.
It was
Probably had.
No, I mean I think maybe Condredge Holloway was the last time there was a JV game or something crazy like that when they played the JV deal.
That's a deep dive we need to do.
That was one. I'll tell you one other one. Then we'll go to the next topic. I know we're about ready to wind it up here. It was a very, very crazy experience going to Hyden, Kentucky, and watching Tim Couch play a game. Because you drove up and you got off, I guess, just north of London, Corbin, and you got on the Daniel Boone Parkway where there's not a street light. It's like pine tree and just trees. And I mean, you're driving through a forest is what you're doing. Can't see anything at all. And you go into this and you kind of get off of an exit and it drops down in. And so I got there early and got parked. And when you walk into the stadium, the way it's set, it looked like a scene out of Field of Dreams. There was like headlights for forever.
Oh, that's awesome.
Of coming in. And like this little bitty community became like this show. I mean, like it was like anybody who was in that remote area of Kentucky was coming to watch this kid play football. And I was there the night he broke the high school passing record. That deal. I did like radio hits in Nashville and Knoxville. Got home at like 5 a.m. or 4 a.m, something crazy like that. And, I had to do Saturday sports talk after doing 6:30 sports cast. I mean, it was something. I was dumb and didn't go to bed basically. But that was a cool experience because that was in the middle of nowhere, and it was high school football at its peak of what you think of high school football. When you think small town community, this is a small town community that just swelled because there was this rock star playing quarterback in this little bitty town. It was crazy.
That's why I love, and again, there's no disrespect to all the bigger schools that we go to every single year because that's awesome too. But I love going to small town high school football in East Tennessee because, for Rivalry Thursday, because you get a taste of that a little bit. Like everything shuts down. Like this is the show. This is the biggest thing in town.
The whole town. I mean, and the town had shut down at like noon, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people were walking a half a mile to the stadium just to try to get, it was crazy. It was just, it was cold that night, but man, it was fun. It was like November, I think.
Shout out Greenback, parking your trucks along the fence and watching the game.
Greenback, shout out Oliver Springs. Every time we're there, we were there this past year, and I remember doing the game for the press box, and there's a couple houses right beyond the football field, and you could see into the living room, and I could see the TV, and I could make out a football game on the TV, and people were on the porch. I'm like, I mean, if that is not the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life.
It was a cool experience. I'm glad I got to go on that one. That was a fun trip to take.